Hi guys, welcome to P3. I'm starting a new part of my channel, which would be about P3 education. And so today I'm going to be focusing on Year 12 economics. The idea behind this channel will be to help students that perhaps have fallen behind in class, to provide them with some more information. And for those that just want to study or revise, this video series should be able to help you do that. So without further ado, we'll move through to our first topic of the series, which is Year 12 Economics, Part 1. Topic 1, the economic problem. Part 1, economic basics. So economics is a study of many things, and it's a study of markets and of people. And modern day economics can also be referred to as neoclassical economics, which is a discipline which is now based on precision and logic. Previously, classical economics had a lot of information about different things, and certainly people knew about the way that the economy worked and functions and about incomes and that sort of thing, but they couldn't perhaps prove their points through mathematical models. Now, this introduction of these mathematical models and more precision to the field of economics has brought about this thought of neoclassical economics. So this new classical economics, or modern day economics as we know it today. It's based on 6 key principles, which you can see there. Now, these 6 key principles are scarcity, choice, thinking at the margin, incentives, the role of markets, and market failure. Scarcity is a situation where all wants and all needs cannot be met because there's a limit to resources. Choice is a selection among alternate goods, services, or actions, so we can only choose this good or that good. Opportunity cost is the value of the next best alternative that was not chosen because we had to pick something else. So if I pick a particular choice, the choice that I forego, the value of that choice is the opportunity cost. Thinking at the margin is comparing costs and benefits of a small change in behavior. So I'm going to be going through these a little bit later in more detail, but I'm just going to skim over them now so you get a general idea of what I'm talking about. When we're talking about markets or the role of markets, it's an arrangement that enables economic interaction between two parties or two people. And then when we talk about market failure, it's a situation where the market doesn't function the way that it's meant to. It doesn't lead to an efficient outcome, and resources aren't allocated properly. And when this happens, there's a potential for the government to come in and to enforce some sort of law or some sort of rule about the way that markets are to operate and goods are produced. So now what we're going to do is we're actually going to have a look at each of these 6 key areas in a little bit more detail. Okay, so scarcity. Scarcity is one of the primary concerns of economics. As stated before, it's when people's resources are insufficient to satisfy their wants or their needs. Scarcity occurs all the time because resources are finite, whereas we as humans decide that we want nearly anything. So our wants and our needs are infinite, and certainly with a increasing population, scarcity is only becoming worse and worse. So, for example, let's say you get paid a certain amount of money in a week, and let's say you keep that money for say a few weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, and then you go to the shop. Now, at the shop, we have to choose what we want. Now, we could choose perhaps to buy an Xbox or a PlayStation, but we can't choose both because we do not have enough money to do that. Okay, so we have a finite resource, and that is our money. However, we want to get both the Xbox and the PlayStation. Okay, but we can't have both. Similarly, you could go and buy a new pair of boots or a handbag. Um, and again, we can't buy both because we have a scarcity of money. And of course, this scarcity of money forces us to do various things, and that's the basis of economics. The scarcity doesn't have to be with money, it could be with a few other things as well. Now, one thing to note is that scarcity is not the same as rarity, because you could have something that is quite rare, but is not scarce, yeah? Because when we're talking about scarcity, we're talking about something that needs to be able to satisfy people's wants. For example, you could have a broken shovel. Now, this broken shovel might be considered rare on a building site, for example, but it's not scarce because nobody actually wants a broken shovel because you can't use it. Now, if it was scarce, it would be a useful object. For example, a shovel might be considered a scarce resource on a building site. Maybe they only have a couple, 2 or 3, maybe a broom or etc. So moving on, we're going to go to our next topic, and that is opportunity cost. Now, in opportunity cost, this is basically the discussion that people are forced to make choices. As we discussed before, we have to choose between what we want to do. And one of these choices could be perhaps that you have to choose between going with your friends to a theme park or taking your grandma to her doctor's appointment. You have to choose between the two because they are occurring at the same time. Now, if you choose to go with your friends to the theme park, your opportunity cost is the value of your grandma going to a doctor's appointment, which is actually quite important. Now, these sort of choices don't have to be as dramatic as, your grandma's doctor's appointment and the theme park with your friends. You could have a pen and you could have an apple. And you could have a pen and an apple, but you can't have both. See, that's the thing. You can't have a pen apple. You can only have a pen or an apple. And the cost of choosing one, the cost of choosing perhaps a pen, is the value of not choosing an apple. So opportunity cost is the value of the next best thing you are foregoing. All right, let's move on. Thinking at the margin. Now, to make choices about options due to scarcity, people weigh up cost versus benefit of their options. Obviously, not everything's going to be the same. For example, you could choose to eat 12 donuts, or you could choose to have a proper meal like a schnitzel or whatever. And obviously the costs and the benefits are going to be weighed up. The donuts have a lot more fat and aren't as good for you as a full meal and a nice balanced diet and that sort of thing. So people do this all the time. They weigh up their costs and their benefits. And this is sort of what thinking at the margin is about. When a person thinks about these costs and benefits, if they think about it for every small action, that's when economists think that they are actually thinking at the margin. What marginal benefit am I getting? And is it better than the marginal cost of this, of actually choosing this option? Have you ever stayed up late at night, perhaps studying for an exam, and it gets really, really late and you're like, I don't know if I can stay up much longer. Maybe I should have a coffee. So you decide to drink a coffee. And everything's all great and good. And you're like, oh yeah, I'm studying and this is going great now. Yep, I'm focused, I've got energy, and I'm not tired anymore. This is good. So you've had your coffee. And then, the coffee's starting to wear off. It's getting a little bit later in the night, perhaps starting to get early in the morning. And you're thinking, should I have that extra coffee? Or should I perhaps go to bed? Because if I have the coffee now, I'll be able to stay up longer and study and revise better for my exam tomorrow. But then another cost of that is thinking, if I have that coffee now, if I have that extra coffee, I might stay awake a bit too long. I might not be able to go to sleep because I've had too much caffeine. And then when I rock up at my exam tomorrow, I might be really, really tired. So is it better for me to go to bed now and not have that extra revision? Or should I have the coffee, have the extra revision, and be a little bit tired at my exam? And that's sort of thinking at the margin. Is weighing up your options, your costs and your benefits of a decision. Okay. Incentives. Incentives for making decisions. People change their behavior all the time. And when your costs and your benefits change for a particular action, your behavior will also change. If you decide to do a particular action and then the costs change, obviously you might reassess what's going on. For example, you're asked to work on a Sunday, a 12-hour shift, but you work every other day of the week. So you've got enough money and you're probably going to be like, yeah, you know what? I don't really want this shift. I'd rather somebody else take the shift. However, your employer tells you that you're going to be paid double time for the whole day. And so you're thinking, yeah, that's like working, 2 days, almost, 2 days. That's really, really good. And so you decide that, yes, you take that Sunday shift because of that incentive, because of that positive incentive of that double time, that extra pay during the day. Now, there are more types of incentives. There's positive incentives, like getting paid more to make you do something. And there's also negative incentives. An example of a negative incentive would be perhaps a speeding fine. If you're driving along, if you speed and you get caught, you'll get fined, so you're less likely to speed. Negative incentives generally discourage behaviors, whereas positive incentives encourage them. So that extra money, that extra moolah. Okay, we're moving on to the role of markets now. If we concentrate on the role of markets. Now, markets just don't exist because they're there. Markets have been, created in a way. People work. We go to work every day. We come home. And that provides us we provide our good or service, and then in return, it gives us money. And we trade that money with someone else in order to be better off. We don't want the money. The money doesn't actually do anything for us. It's an object. It's a symbol of value. So we trade that symbol of value to somebody else for something that we want to be better off. We may need a new jumper. So we trade that. We get the new jumper, and the other person gets what they want, which would be the money. You could look at an example of perhaps somebody trading money for an apple. The person gets the money, the storekeeper gets the money, and we get the apple. We're better off, and the storekeeper's got some money, and he might want to spend that on something he wants. So he's better off as well, or she, depending on who owns the store. Now, for neoclassical economics, markets aren't quite as simple as that. There is market competition. Now, market competition is a really, really good thing. It's probably the best thing that can happen. When companies compete for your money, they have to compete on price and on product design, and this allows things to happen in the economy that normally wouldn't. Companies have to think about how they produce their goods. They have to think about what will save them the most money and what will gain them the most market share. And they'll also have to figure out a way to most efficiently allocate resources. And it's this efficient allocation of resources, both from companies and to the consumer, which is what allows the economy to run efficiently. And I'm going to cover that a little bit more in detail in a later episode. But now we'll move on to market failure. Market failure is actually another really important aspect, but perhaps a little bit controversial as well at the same time. Now, when we're talking about market failure, we're talking about when resources aren't allocated efficiently in a marketplace. And perhaps that marketplace is dominated by one company in a monopoly. Now, we've all played Monopoly before, and basically what happens is one person gets all of the resources on the board, all of the hotels, all of the properties, basically. And they are completely in control of the game. Now, in a marketplace, if this happens, and there is one company that is so big that it is in control of everything, and it's able to buy out other companies, what happens is eventually they are able to control the price. They're able to control the price of the goods in the marketplace. And what happens then is only that company becomes better off. They actually inhibit the way that markets operate. Markets are then not a place where people go, or the economic exchange is facilitated and helped along. It's actually inhibited by this one company. Firms can also attempt to, so say it's not a monopoly anymore, say there's healthy competition, firms can also get carried away with what they do in their company. They try to cut costs everywhere, and what happens is they then decide to do something which may be not ethical. They may decide to pollute the environment in some aspect. Now, this pollution isn't a good thing. And when this happens, that's when the market and the economy needs the government to help out. Now, this happens all across the board, and that's why the government tries to regulate the economy as much as they can, but not too much. Because government intervention, although it is a good thing, it can also be a very bad thing, especially if there's too much taxes on the economy. It can actually hinder it. And so governments may need to step in an economy to ensure that efficiency happens and that fairness happens when markets operate. So finally, this is the last thing I'm going to talk about for today's episode. Thanks for making it this far. We're going to be talking about types of resources. Now, there are 4 types of resources. There's land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. Now, these 4 different aspects all work together, as you'll see a little bit later on with entrepreneurship. Now, with a land, when we're talking about land resources, we're talking about natural resources that occur, not that people make or create. Now, these natural resources may be considered as something like wheat. It could be a river. It could be electricity, for example. It could be water, the sunlight, anything that occurs naturally. Trees, any natural resource is what we're referring to when we talk about land. When we talk about labor, we're specifically talking about humans. We're talking about how people work and use their work to create some sort of resource, okay? So we're talking about people there. We're talking about somebody going to work, providing their service, and then going home. That person is what we're talking about when we're talking about labor. Strictly people working. When we talk about capital, it gets a little bit more complicated. Capital is referred to as a good or service that is needed to produce another good or service. So one example could be, let's think about it. A pen. A pen could be considered as capital. You need a pen to write things, and that writing could be considered another good or service. Some people probably think computers are capital as well, and that's true. Another thing that could be capital would be an automobile, right? For a goods, a courier. If a courier doesn't have a car, then they can't do their job. So that car is his capital. It allows him to deliver goods and produce the service of good delivery. So capital is a good or service that helps to produce another good or service. Finally, we have entrepreneurship, right? Entrepreneurship is basically you, or the person that's in charge, the boss of the business. they are a resource because they are able to pull these other resources together. They get the natural resources, the land. They get the labor, the people to help them produce their good. Their store people, their waiters, their waitresses, their retail workers, the businessmen, doctors, nurses, politicians, etc. They are all part of labor. And then we move on to capital as well. This entrepreneurship pulls all these things together. He provides the capital for the labor. So the laborer has his shovel. The laborer has what he needs to do his job, or her job. Now we're moving on. Finally, I've set up this task for you to do. I've set up this task. So next to me, this way, I think. Yep, that way. Yeah, cool. Next to me, you'll see a whole heap of pictures. Now, these pictures are to do with different types of resources. They're also known as factors of production. Okay, these 4 resources are factors of production. Remember that. So, these factors of production are all displayed in pictures. However, the pictures are not labeled. What I want you to do now, quickly, I'll give you a few moments, is to look through each of them and to label them quickly in your head. So if we looked at that first one, the top left, there's a person digging a hole. Now, what would that be? What would that be? That's a person digging a hole and working. So that would be labor. Okay? So that first picture is labor. So if you move through the rest of them, and label each of them. We're getting a little bit lower, like natural resources and that sort of thing. And once you're done, maybe you want to pause the video here, perhaps. Okay, and now I'm going to reveal the answers. Now there are slight differences between the two of these. Okay, one could argue that Donald Trump is also labor as well as entrepreneurship, because he is le president now in America. However, I would go for entrepreneurship because he's more well known for his entrepreneurial skills, I would say. Well, that's what I knew him for before he was the president. Perhaps now he might be well known as the president. So I'll accept entrepreneurship and labor for that option. But you can see there that it's quite easy to label these different factors of production and these different resources. And once you know about these resources, it will help you discover more about economics a little bit later on. This is basically a building block to allow you to further analyze economic terms in the future. Okay, so that's it for our activity, and we've actually reached our recap for the lesson. So what we did today in this lesson is we looked at scarcity. We looked at how our wants and our needs aren't satisfied by the resources that we have, and that resources are scarce. There's not many of them. We looked at opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is basically the notion that, we have to pick. We have to pick because of the scarcity. We have to pick between 2 options, and if we pick one option, we can't have the other option, and the value of that option is our opportunity cost. We also talked about thinking out the margin, comparing costs and benefits of a small change of behavior. We also talked about the market and how the market is a place which allows economic exchange between 2 parties, and it also allows the efficient allocation of resources within an economy. We talked about market failure as well, or a situation where the market doesn't operate the way that it's meant to, and that perhaps the most efficient outcome and the efficient allocation of goods isn't happening. And so what happens is the role of the government steps in. The government may have to step in to alleviate any sort of inefficiencies or improper actions occurring in the market. After that, we looked at types of resources. We looked at factors of production. We talked about land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. And we found out that land was these natural resources that occur. Capital was goods or services that enable you to produce other goods or services. So things like a coffee machine. We also talked about labor being a person working, human human people working to create goods or services. And then we talked about, finally, entrepreneurship, which is the boss, the man, the big fella, sorting everything out, bringing all of those resources, those factors together to produce something really good, to produce a company, to make sure that everything works. And that's it for our episode today, for our first lesson. Thanks for making it.